they don't bring about the changes and reforms they promised, then people should fill the streets until those promises are fulfilled. Very interesting comments there. If you've got some thoughts on what you've just heard in the studio and from our viewers, let us know. Continue to email africa@presstv.co.uk, or if you prefer, just text +44 7800 8086. And of course, that Facebook fan page, thank you so much, is growing bigger and bigger. It's Africa Today, Press TV, London. As we were saying there, Asim, it seems that it's almost like this is like a 21st century version of imperialism in an African context. Is this how you see the situation evolving? Because there are concerns about the same thing, about the Arab Spring that's happening in North Africa, that these revolutions are now being subsumed and taken over to a bigger Western agenda. Mm-hmm. I mean, how does it fit in geopolitically? Where does Somalia fit in this picture?
Well, I mean, I think the fact is that the Americans need to provide an image of instability within the region, and the most ideal target in order to present that was Somalia. It was the one that, you know, for all intents and purposes was the easiest to invade, especially with Ethiopia being next door and being very, very keen on partnering with the US. I mean, Ethiopia is a country that we've known for decades has an extremely poor human rights record. In fact, probably one of the worst human rights records in the entire region.
So you're saying Somalia was easier to invade because of Ethiopia's relationship to the West?
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, the US specifically targeted Ethiopia in order to give it some freedom. Okay, you know, saying to Ethiopia, you help us with this, and we'll turn a blind eye to all of the abuses that you carry out almost on a daily basis. I mean, people might say that, well, why didn't the US partner with Kenya? You know, that seems to make more sense, because Kenya is probably, you know, in some ways in the region a much stronger partner. But the reality is Kenya has a much stronger civil society than Ethiopia does. Ethiopia was by far more a useful target for the Americans, because they could use them monetarily, and they could also pressurize them in order to actually carry out this campaign, to prosecute this campaign. And that is the reason why Kenya wasn't used, even though Kenya has a history of having been targeted by international terrorism.
Yeah,
so you would have thought that automatically they'd put up their hands, but because Kenya has such a strong civil society, and we saw in the aftermath of all these renditions and detentions, it was the Kenyan activists who came out there and actually said, no, you're not going to do this in our name.
Right.
You know, and in fact, you know, subsequently we've seen the detention and the rendition of Kenyan human rights activists
precisely because
they got involved in this, and because they tried to bring a stop to this.
Okay, if I could bring you in, Zakaria, I mean, The Re-Liberation of Somalia is the title of the organization that you are a part of. What exactly do you mean about that? You know, where does that fit in? What are you aiming for? Are you in support of Al-Shabaab type thinking, or where do you fit in?
No, we're not. This organization has been established in 2007 when the Ethiopians invaded and occupied the capital city of Somalia with the support, logistical and air support of the American and British. And at the time we have established this organization in Asmara, Eritrea. Sheikh Sharif, who is now so-called TFG president, Transitional Federal Government president, was the chairman of the organization.
Ah, okay.
And I was his second man. He was deputy. I was his deputy. What happened in the first 3 months when we succeeded to evict Ethiopians and defeat them militarily, the Western countries, particularly America and British, have felt that Somali nationalism is growing and the Ethiopians actually is being defeated militarily. So they came to us and they have divided us. They split us into two. They took Sheikh Sharif and they have promised to bring him as a president, to install him as president in Djibouti. Obviously, I and other groups of the organization refused it because this was against our objectives to re-liberate Somalia. The objective is to, you know, Somalia is under occupation literally by Western powers. I'm telling you, it's not only Americans, there are French intelligence who are embedded with the AMISOM, African mission in Somalia,
Yes.
Mainly from contingents from Burundi and Uganda. There is also British intelligence. There are companies, mercenary companies from Britain, like Dram Cossack. There is Blackwater there.
Private mercenary companies going there to do their business.
Exactly, from who's been hired by. They hired SAS, ex-SAS soldiers, United States elite forces. The airport of Mogadishu is run literally by a company, a mercenary company. It's called SKA. Blackwater is there also, working underground in an area between the airport and former military training camp. Well, this is the whole. I mean, if those of us who follow up the media actually knows the scale of bloodshed in Somalia. If I take, for example, some statistics.
Well, you've given us plenty of statistics that paint a quite bleak picture. I mean, how do you see a way forward? You're putting information out there. People are being politically educated about what's going on. What do you think it'll take to actually effect some practical change?
Well, I mean, I think that first and foremost has to come from the Somalis themselves. And really, well and truly, like we've seen in Libya and other places, that only until they're willing to actually bring about that change will it actually happen. Zachary has mentioned, obviously, Sheikh Sharif and the role that he's played. He could have been somebody that brokered a real peace for the Somalis and a new era for them, but instead he chose to actually join the transitional federal government. Which, I mean, here's a man who effectively was welcoming foreign nationals into the country, saying, look, there's a whole new level of prosperity under the UIC, you're able to do things. And the next thing we know is that he's actually selling them to the Americans as prisoner. They've been putting on these rendition flights. So, you know, the kind of policies that we're seeing, unfortunately, in Somalia, whereby they've already bought certain individuals, has resulted in their, you know, in there being a stop on any genuine kind of peaceful processes.
This has been a cycle that has been happening so frustratingly since the independence struggles over 50 years. You could describe exactly what you just said for so many different African countries, that divide and rule based on class or different interests. Now, what would you say, where does Al-Shabaab fit in with regard to this, like with your organization? Would you work with Al-Shabaab in terms of unifying a sense of Somali identity and pride around liberating the country?
No, we're different from Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab, actually, it's a consequences of the Ethiopian occupation, when they have, these are young men who has witnessed it. Their mothers has been raped. And their brothers and sisters and fathers have been killed by the. But
is it true they control most of the country?
They control, yes, 9 regions out of 18 regions. So they are very strong.
So they can't be ignored.
They cannot be ignored.
It's the grievance, you see, that Al-Shabaab represents that you cannot get rid of. You see, the Union of Islamic Courts represented the stability of Somali opinion. When you take that away, like with FIS in Algeria, okay, what results is a vacuum where, you know, the youth literally have absolutely no option other than to rebel and to
because
say
there's no leadership.
Because there's no leadership, and because effectively the one chance at freedom that they thought they had was taken away from them. And so that's what happens, that vacuum thing, and then Al-Shabaab appears.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm afraid I have to stop you there, just as the discussion was coming to a very interesting point, but I'm sure we'll be back discussing Somalia. That's all the time we have today. Thanks to all of you who've been sending comments to us. Email africa@presstv.co.uk, or if you prefer, text +44 7800 008 Don't forget, messages are charged at local operator rates. A huge thank you to today's guests, Asim Qureshi and Zakaria Mahmoud Haj Abdi. Henry will be back next week for another edition of Africa Today. But until then, from today's team, it's bye for now.